Good afternoon. Welcome to the meeting of the Board of Supervisors of the City and County of San Francisco, home to the 2014 World Series champions, the San Francisco Giants. It is Tuesday, November the 4th, 2014. It is Election Day. Please go and vote. With that, Madam Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Supervisor Avalos. Avalos present. Supervisor Breed.
Here.
Breed present. Supervisor Campos.
Present.
Campos present. President Chu.
Present.
Chu present. Supervisor Cohen.
Present.
Cohen present. Supervisor Farrell.
Present.
Farrell present. Supervisor Kim. Kim present. Supervisor Marr. Marr present. Supervisor Tang.
Present.
Tang present. Supervisor Wiener.
Present.
Wiener present. Supervisor Yee.
Present.
Yee present. Mr. President, all members are present.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, could you please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Colleagues, we have our September 30th, 2014 board meeting minutes. Could I have a motion to approve? Motion by Supervisor Cohen, seconded by Supervisor Breed. Without objection, those meeting minutes will be approved. Madam Clerk, are there any communications?
There are none to report today, Mr. President.
And could you read our consent agenda?
Item number 1 is an ordinance to amend the police code to modify access to reproductive health care facilities.
Roll call vote.
On item 1, Supervisor Farrell.
Aye.
Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim.
Aye.
Kim, aye. Supervisor Marr. Marr, aye. Supervisor Tang.
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener. Wiener, aye. Supervisor Yee.
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos.
Aye.
Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed. Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos.
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Chu.
Aye.
Chu, aye. Supervisor Cohen.
Aye.
Cohen, aye. There are 11 ayes.
The ordinance is finally passed. Item 2.
Item 2 is an ordinance to appropriate approximately $302,000 from the General Fund Reserve to the Department of Public Health for HIV transmission prevention support.
Roll call vote.
On item 2, Supervisor Farrell.
Aye.
Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim.
Aye.
Kim, aye. Supervisor Marr.
Aye.
Marr, aye. Supervisor Tang.
No.
Tang, no. Supervisor Wiener. Wiener, aye. Supervisor Yee. Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos. Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed. Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos.
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Chu.
Aye.
Chu, aye. Supervisor Cohen.
Aye.
Cohen, aye. There are 10 ayes, 1 no.
This ordinance is finally passed. Items 3 and 4.
Items 3 and 4 are 2 ordinances that amend the planning code and the zoning map to establish the Divisadero Street and the Fillmore Street Neighborhood Commercial District, deleting the Divisadero Street Alcohol Restricted Use District, and amending various other code sections to make conforming and technical changes and making the requisite findings.
Roll call vote.
On items 3 and 4, Supervisor Farrell. Aye. Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim. Kim, aye. Supervisor Marr.
Aye.
Marr, aye. Supervisor Tang.
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener. Wiener, aye. Supervisor Yee.
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos. Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed. Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos.
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Chu.
Aye.
Chu, aye. Supervisor Cohen. Aye. Cohen, aye. There are 11 ayes.
Those ordinances are finally passed. Item 5.
Item 5 is an ordinance to suspend certain provisions of the Administrative Code, Chapter 56, and the Planning Code, Section 249.28, and approve the development agreement between the City and 181 Fremont Street for certain real property located in the Trans-Bay Redevelopment Project area and making the requisite findings.
Same house, same call. This ordinance is finally passed. Item 6.
Item 6, resolution to authorize the Recreation and Park Department to accept and expend a grant of $200,000 from the state to support the Youth Stewardship Program.
Same house, same call. This resolution is adopted. Next item.
Item 7, resolution to retroactively authorize the Public Defender's Office to accept and expend an approximate grant amount of $76,000 from the Board of State and Community Corrections for local juvenile justice accountability measures.
Same house, same call. This resolution is adopted. Next item.
Item 8, resolution to receive and approve annual reports for the Fisherman's Wharf Community Benefit District and the Portside Community Benefit District for fiscal years 2009 through 2013.
Same house, same call. This resolution is adopted. Next item.
Item 9 is an ordinance to amend the planning code and the zoning map, uses, conformity of uses, parking requirements for uses, and the special use districts.
Colleagues, same house, same call. Without objection, this ordinance is passed in the first reading. Next item.
Item 10 It's an ordinance to amend the planning code to amend the definition of formula retail and large-scale controls.
Supervisor Marr.
Thank you, President Chu. Colleagues, this is before us quite a bit of work that went into a major citywide effort to strengthen our formula retail chain store controls. I wanted to thank a number of people for this effort. We had a planning commission document, and the document that I, along with co-sponsors Supervisor Avalos and Yee, proposed. But I wanted to thank Supervisors Wiener for his amendments at the Land Use Committee and Supervisor Cohen for their support at the committee as well. But there's a lot of people that deserve thanks for this one piece of legislation that's moving forward today. First of all, I'd like to thank the broad coalition of neighborhood groups, small business leaders, and many others that put their time and effort into this piece of legislation. I wanted to thank Planning Director John Ram, but especially planning staff, in particular Kanishka Burns, who did tremendous work, and Anne-Marie Rogers, really helping us come together with one unified measure. Tremendous work. Also, the City Attorney's Office, Victoria Wong, and let me try to remember, Francesca Gessner, I believe, and Kate Stacy as well. Also, this is an effort that I believe strengthens and updates and modernizes our city's chain store and formula retail ordinance. I wanted to also thank the consultants that put a lot of effort on behalf of the planning department, strategic economics, to look at data and to give us suggestions for developing a comprehensive approach to formula retail in San Francisco, and all the time they spent working with my staff to overcome what initially seemed to be a significant number of differences, but coming together, especially over the past few months, to bring the proposals together. I wanted to also thank Todd Rufo from the Mayor's Office of Economic and Workforce Development, and Supervisor Wiener and his aide Andres Power also for helping us achieve some of the final amendments and agreements that I believe strengthens our policy. I wanted to thank especially Nick Pagalatos from my staff. I had called him the Bruce Bochy of staffers and City Hall experts, really bringing people together as a team to move across the finish line in many cases. The hours and hours of building unity, and for people to put aside self-interest to find the common ground and common goals kind of in this was really significant. So I totally thank Nick Pagalatos from my office. I believe we've struck a balance between having a stronger neighborhood voice in the process of conditional use processes, but also a balance of small independent stores, but also smaller chains and even larger chains that are in many of our districts as well. I wanted to also thank many individuals that we consulted with during this process of many months, including, and I have this list here so I don't leave anyone out, and my apologies if anyone is left out, but especially Stacy Mitchell from the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, Paul Wormer from the Japantown Task Force, Wendy Mogg from Sweet Inspiration Bakery, Scott Hauge from the Small Business California, Stephen Cornell of Brownie's Hardware, and Dee Dee Workman, Chris Wright, and Jim Lazarus from the Chamber of Commerce, Gwyneth Borden from the Golden Gate Restaurant Association, Gary Weiss, Regina Dickendrizi, the head of our Office of Small Business, Kathleen Dooley, Small Business Commissioner, who put a hell of a lot of time into this as well, Rick Karp and Hut Landon from SF Loma as well, John Toja from the Pet Store Coalition, Pat Tura and Lynn Bayer from the DuBose Triangle Neighborhood Association, Andy Blue and Kyle Smealy from the Plaza 16 Coalition, Kamal Karaja, Miriam Zazunis and the Arab American Grocers Association, Nancy Shanahan of the Telegraph Hill Dwellers, and Aaron Peskin as well, Peter Cohen, an activist from District 8 and from the Community Housing Advocates as well, Gabriel Medina of Mission Economic Development Agency, Russell Pritchard, Larry Cronander of the Hayes Valley Merchants Association, Cynthia Huey, and Jesse Fink of the Clement Street Merchants Association, Deanna Davenport Conway of the Valencia Street Merchants Association for their hard work on this as well. I wanted to also say that the conclusions that were drawn by the major study that the planning staff commissioned really said that a comprehensive, or in their comprehensive study, showed that our formula retail controls are working in San Francisco, and we did not need a radical overhaul, but rather some thoughtful tinkering in order to update and strengthen our existing formula retail controls. It was very important for me and the coalition that I work with to ensure that there was a stronger neighborhood voice in the process, and I believe we've accomplished that. And it helps us develop neighborhood corridors more effectively, but also level the playing field for those local, independent, and small businesses that are the backbone of our economy and that provide so much of the character, the jobs, and the unique charm of our neighborhoods. The legislation also comes forward after dozens and dozens of meetings with community residents and small business owners, and a dialogue not only with the Office of Economic Development, but the Planning Department and my office as well. Many of the small businesses in our neighborhoods are struggling right now, independent businesses right now, to keep up with the rising rents, even as the city's economic growth is booming, and it's been attracting new national brands and chain stores, but it's allowed a lot of independent retailers to expand as well, but they're still struggling. I think according to the Strategic Economics Report, creating disincentives for formula retailers to locate in San Francisco's neighborhood commercial districts, the formula retail controls may help lower costs for independent retailers, and by making neighborhood commercial districts less attractive for formula retailers, formula retail controls may also help lower rents in some of our districts, reducing costs for our smaller independent retailers. Also, the formula retail conditional use authorization process allows the Planning Commission to exercise discretion and to respond to case-by-case concerns raised by community members. And I think the majority of our formula retail CU applications have been approved according to the Planning Department data. However, in cases where community members have reached a clear consensus that a proposed chain store or formula retailer is not desirable and appeared at the Planning Commission hearings, CU authorizations have often been denied or withdrawn. So the process works, and I think our legislation helps to strengthen it. Strategic Economics, in their study, also found that formula retailers' willingness to go through the formula retail conditional use application process depends on the unique conditions in specific districts. And formula retailers or chain stores are more likely to submit applications in neighborhoods with strong market demands for new retail and where they anticipate positive reception by the community. The findings also from the Strategic Economics Report point to a conditional use process that gives community and decision makers an opportunity to have a reasoned dialogue, and that generally reaches rational and reasonable outcomes that make sense for both residents as well as business. There's 1,250 chain stores in the city right now, and our legislation closes loopholes that leave ambiguity in our code, and the ambiguity and the lack of clarity has been robbing our communities and existing businesses of the opportunity to have a say in the critical economic development decisions that have far-reaching impacts on our city and neighborhoods. It also brings a greater level of objective data into the decision-making process, not just for the Planning Commission, but planning staff and the Board of Supervisors, and it will help increase civic participation as well. So more data, more useful and relevant data to improve the decision-making process from this legislation. I'm just going to really quickly say that there are 9 major components of the legislation: expanding the definition of formula retail chain stores to apply to businesses with 11 or more outlets worldwide, as well as opposed to only within the U.S. So we're expanding to include global stores in a chain. Number 2, we include new retail uses that have not been included. That's other loopholes. Earlier, we included banks. That was through separate legislation. But now we're including businesses such as fitness centers and chains, gymnasiums, check cashing outlets, massage parlors, and other types of uses that may raise concerns from neighborhoods. Number 3, the ordinance is requiring that when a conditional use application for formula retail use, the Planning Commission considers an economic impact of the proposed use on other businesses in the area. What we came up with was a new process that will look more carefully at how this process moves forward. Number 4, we're expanding the notice requirement of formula retail applications So requiring an additional 10 days of notice for neighborhoods to have a say before the Planning Commission's hearing at which the application would be considered. There's posting on the internet. There's an additional 10 days of notice, and we think this strengthens the neighborhood voice in our process. Lastly, we are creating a more consistent and efficient way to deal with situations where formula retail businesses are replacing existing formula retail businesses. We're expanding formula retail controls to mid-market through Supervisor Wiener's and Supervisor Kim's suggestions. We're also maintaining the number of outlets that are required to be what's defined as formula retail at 11. So the proposal initially had been from the planning department to go up to 19, but through agreements made in this process, we are keeping it at 11 and not weakening our formula retail controls. Lastly, in addition, I intend to create a working group with stakeholders that will be convened by my office, working closely with the planning department staff to evaluate the issues raised by formula retail subsidiaries like Jack Spade and others that are owned by a larger corporate entity. And we're looking into how we would ensure that the planning staff have enough staffing and resources to look at these tricky issues for the future. This group will meet regularly with the planning department staff and representatives from the city attorney's office to develop legally viable recommendations for how to deal with an increasing number of formula subsidiaries and spin-offs in our city. Lastly, I wanted to say that for the smaller, locally owned, independent, smaller chains that might be above 11 but below 20 chains, we are looking at specific ways to help expedite the process for the SF Soup companies and the Phil's Coffee type chains that many people feel are very different than the larger chains that tend to be from out of the region and out of the city as well. We're looking at a specific mechanism within the planning department called the Small Business Priority Processing Pilot, or SB4P, that creates a streamlined process for small chains, and we'll be hopefully moving forward with some trailing legislation and working with the planning staff to look at processes that really treat our smaller chains fairly as well. I wanted to lastly say that as this was amended in committee, Supervisor Wiener had a number of amendments that were approved by the committee, and I believe he has another one once I'm done with my comments. Let me just see if there's anything else I need to say. In committee also, we made a few amendments to remove business and professional services from the list of uses, and Supervisor Wiener and my office will be looking at a zoning-based approach for dealing with those sorts of business and professional service chains, and especially looking at second floor and street level storefronts, but more second floor and upper level spaces for those type of businesses, but looking at a process that treats these types of businesses a little bit differently than others. And on the initial proposal to have an economic impact report requirement for a chain going into a neighborhood, my office had proposed a 3,000 square foot threshold. The planning staff had recommended a 50,000 square foot threshold, and the compromise and the agreement we came up with was going down to 20,000 square feet for that requirement for an economic impact study that would be completed by the applicant. We feel that this agreement allows us to still capture a number of the types of chains that may have an economic impact around them. With these amendments, I feel that our community-based coalition and the planning department are in total agreement in moving forward with one piece of legislation that I believe strengthens our formula retail controls and appreciates the diversity of our different districts so that those that want a large formula retail grocery store, for example, to go in for different reasons have the flexibility to allow that. Those that different areas with neighborhood commercial districts that have concerns about some big box stores going in and how it would impact smaller businesses will also have a strong say in the process for the future. So it balances the needs of different districts and it gives neighborhoods more of a voice. So with that, I wanted to thank everyone again and turn it over to Supervisor Wiener for his amendments as well.
Thank you, Supervisor Marr. I think Supervisor Breed is next up on the roster. Supervisor Breed.
Thank you. I want to thank Supervisor Marr, the Planning Department, and Office of Economic and Workforce Development for all of the work, and some of the neighborhood groups who have been actively engaged in this issue. As you know, our office is we pushed for the inclusion of international locations as well as subsidiaries, and I'm glad that that was taken into consideration, and the international locations are in this legislation, and we are going to be looking closely at subsidiaries and what that might mean. But I want to basically just talk about just a little bit of a balance here, because I do think that there is a time and place for formula retail, because what we've discovered by working with the planning department is that with formula retail establishments, more often they have lower prices and they hire from some of the low income communities. Particularly, that has been the experience in my district. And what I want to make sure that we do is we strike a balance. A lot of this legislation and looking at formula retail in the past had come out of Hayes Valley, and pushed by the Hayes Valley Merchants Association, and also folks in the Upper Haight neighborhood who pushed to keep a lot of formula retail establishments out of their area. However, in the Lower Haight, when Walgreens burned down, CVS came into the neighborhood, and most of the folks who lived in the neighborhood really wanted a pharmacy. They really wanted a pharmacy that didn't have high prices, and they were concerned that having an establishment that was owned locally or something that wasn't a formula retail could lead to higher prices. And so we took the neighborhood's lead on that particular issue. And I do think it's important that as much as we are trying to make sure that we strike a balance here, that we also listen to the concerns of the community, and we make sure that the data is provided in order to make the best decision. As it relates to determining whether or not a formula retail establishment would be a good use for a particular neighborhood or not. For Hayes Valley in particular is a very unique neighborhood. It's changed significantly, especially after the freeway was torn down on Octavia Boulevard. And most recently, we have had some challenges with the area that's specifically set to house a grocery store, but the battle between whether or not it should be formula retail or it shouldn't be. And after doing extensive research on that particular issue, we discovered that we have residents who live directly across the street from this planned location whose annual household income is anywhere from $8,000 to $10,000 to $12,000 a year. And directly across the street from some of these low-income residents are people whose annual income is $88,000 a year. And there is definitely a push to not have a formula retail establishment. But again, after working with the planning department, we discovered that the prices in comparison to a formula retail establishment compared to independent grocery stores, there just is a distinctive, there's a clear difference between what they charge and what formula retail establishments charge, unfortunately, because we know that they're able to get products in bulk. We know that they have a different way in which they can bring products into their store because they probably have more stores. And so I know that I'm probably not providing you with any information that you don't already know, but I wanted to make it clear that although I definitely support this legislation, I definitely support a number of things that were added to strengthen our formula retail policies. I do want to make it clear that if necessary, I will, as a member of the board, push to support a formula retail establishment, especially as it relates to a grocery store in my community, if it could offer affordable prices for the constituents that are directly living across the street from that location. And I know that there are guidelines in place so that they too have to go through an environmental impact report if they're over 20,000 square feet, and I know that that's a part of the legislation, and I think that they should, regardless of the establishment. And so there are things set in place here. I think this is a good, solid piece of legislation. I appreciate the work that's gone into it, and I hope that in the future, if we determine that some of the things that are placed in this legislation create barriers to actually getting the services that some of these communities want, we should maybe look at revisiting the legislation in order to make changes in the future. So again, thank you all for all your hard work on this, and I look forward to seeing this item move forward today. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Wiener.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too want to thank Supervisor Marr and his office for their work on this legislation, and the Planning Department as well, and thank Supervisor Marr for his willingness to engage in dialogue with the department, with various stakeholders on all sides of the issues to come up with, I think, a really sensible piece of legislation that, while not everyone agrees got exactly what they wanted, I think really does move the ball forward in terms of improving our approach to formula retail. So thank you. I also want to acknowledge and thank Andres Power in my office, who put a lot of work in as well, helping to make sure that this could move forward in an efficient way. As Supervisor Marr mentioned, I have a very minor cleanup amendment, some language suggested by the Planning Department to tweak one of the amendments that we have put in on committee. It's on page 80, lines 17 to 19, and we've distributed the amendment to you, and so I move to adopt that amendment.
Colleague Supervisor Wiener has offered a motion to amend. Is there a second to that? Second by Supervisor Marr. Colleagues, any objection? Without objection, the amendment is made. Supervisor Kim.
Thank you. I also want to acknowledge Supervisor Marr and all of his work, along with the Planning Department, who I know underwent a year-long study on formula retail throughout the city of San Francisco. I also want to appreciate that we are making permanent the interim controls on Mid-Market Street from 6 to 11th Street on formula retail. It's something that we had introduced last summer because as Mid-Market continues to grow, which is a wonderful thing, and commercial vacancy goes down, what we are now seeing is that with rising rents, there's more pressure on our small businesses on Mid-Market, but actually also more of a demand from both our residents and workers on Mid-Market for small retail and small businesses that make up the neighborhoods in other parts of San Francisco. And so the combined push to see that kind of unique character in this neighborhood as more people move there to work and to live, along with supporting the small businesses that exist along there. Really happy that we are going to make these interim controls permanent here in District 6, and that we'll be able to continue to support a vibrant corridor that has a mix of both formula retail and small businesses on Market Street.
Supervisor Marr.
I guess lastly, I wanted to thank Anne-Marie Rogers and Kanishka Burns for the hard work, but being such great advisors to my office as well as we were trying to move this forward. But thank you so much to both of you. I wanted to also give props to the process from 10 years ago when this Board of Supervisors, after North Beach and Hayes Valley merchants and residents really developed great legislation to move forward to really level the playing field for neighborhood character in our smaller businesses. I wanted to, in particular, thank the Community Coalition from 2006, the Prop G campaign, and many of them were really involved with this process, but especially our former President, Matt Gonzalez from this board, and former President Aaron Peskin for their work on crafting legislation that we are making better and strengthening today. So I ask for all of your support, and thank you to my colleagues as well.
Thank you, Supervisor. And with that, unless there's any more discussion, let's take a roll call on this ordinance.
On item 10 as amended, Supervisor Farrell.
Aye.
Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim.
Aye.
Kim, aye. Supervisor Marr.
Aye.
Marr, aye. Supervisor Tang.
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener.
Aye.
Wiener, aye. Supervisor Yee.
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos. Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed. Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos.
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Chu.
Aye.
Chu, aye. Supervisor Cohen.
Aye.
Cohen, aye. There are 11 ayes.
This ordinance is passed on the first reading. Item 11.
Item 11 is an ordinance to amend the administrative code to provide a new method for calculating the interest on residential rental security deposits beginning March 1st, 2015.
Same House, same call, colleagues. Without objection, this ordinance is passed on the first reading. Item 12.
Item 12 is an ordinance to order the summary street vacation of a portion of Raccoon Drive between Twin Peaks Boulevard and St. Germain Avenue, including the approval of a quitclaim of the city's interest and public access easement, both in and over the portion of the vacation area, affirming the CEQA determination and making the requisite findings, and authorizing other official acts in connection with this ordinance.
Same House, same call. This ordinance is passed on the first reading. Colleagues, when we go to our 230 special order, I do understand Supervisor Yee has an item for this section.
Thank you, President Chu. I'm going to take this opportunity during this session of the special order to recognize someone that has been deceased. And I want to also recognize that his family and of Sandy Siegel is here, Patty, and I believe that's her sons. And I think the grandson was here, I saw. Okay, I'll make sure I'll point them out. But, and Sandy, both Sandy and Patty are friends of mine, and Patty, for those that may not know Patty Siegel, she's really a giant amongst people that have really driven and developed and molded the whole child care system, not only in San Francisco, not only in California, but nationally. She's recognized throughout the nation for all the work she's done. But today, colleagues, I would like to adjourn the meeting in the memory of Sandy Siegel. Sandy passed away on October 3rd from a rare form of lymphoma, with his beloved wife of 49 years, Patty, by his side. Sandy was a math teacher in San Francisco for over 40 years in our public schools. He touched the lives of thousands of students during his years at Presidio Hill School, Hoover Middle School, Lowell, and Lincoln High Schools. The last three schools being schools that both my daughters attended. He spent his sabbatical year teaching at a secondary school in Ghana and had returned many times to Ghana, delivering much-needed refurbished computers for the young people over there. Sandy's love for education and being a mentor to children was so important to him. He loved to teach life lessons and would often use music as a tool. When he volunteered in the third grade class at Tenderloin Elementary School, he used a Beatles song to get the children's focus and attention, and it actually worked, even in this day of age. So Sandy was a practical, visionary man, deeply committed to social justice and world peace. While a student at UC Davis, he participated in the 1964 Mississippi Freedom Summer Project, working in a freedom school in Clarksdale. He then continued to volunteer countless hours in the freedom speech movement. Sandy took great joy in his retirement, spending time with his family, and loved spending time with his grandchildren, Declan, Chao, Oana, and Tiago. He would often be seen riding his bike with his grandchildren behind him. Today, I would like to offer my sincere condolences to the Sandy's family, his wife Patty, his three children, Todd, Tara, and Kelsey, their partners, and Sandy's sisters and brothers, and thank you for allowing me to take this out of order and recognize and respect the family that are here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Colleagues, I understand we need a motion for privilege of the floor to consider an in memoriam at this time. Supervisor Yee has made that, seconded by Supervisor Kim. Without objection, if we could grant the privilege of the floor to Supervisor Yee on that. Thank you, Supervisor Yee.
Thank you.
And with that, that concludes our 2:30 special order. Madam Clerk, why don't we now go to roll call.
First up to introduce new business at roll call, Supervisor Kim. Okay. Supervisor Marr.
I'll be extremely brief. Colleagues, for the past several weeks, our city has had many of our small artists and art studios open through San Francisco Open Studios. This coming weekend, many of the artists in the Richmond District and other neighborhoods will be opening their doors and showing their work. I encourage all of us to support our arts as a key characteristic that helps San Francisco thrive. San Francisco Open Studios at the end of this week will mark the end of another successful annual art exhibition. It's the oldest and largest open studios program in the country, and it features an annual month-long art event in October and November that showcases over 800 emerging and established San Francisco artists in their studios. I just love riding my bike around to a number of the studios in the areas around where I live, but also seeking out other neighborhoods as well to see the artists and how they do their art, and I think supporting them is critical. Each weekend, art patrons, admirers, and collectors venture out on self-guided tours to see as many SF Open Studio artists and their artworks as possible in the hopes of finding their next true art love. The event connects collectors with artists for engaging dialogue and a glimpse into the life of the working artist. SF Open Studios simultaneously helps artists build their mailing lists, gain new admirers, and ultimately sustain a living making art. The opening at Some Arts in Supervisor Kim's district was wonderful to get to meet a lot of the artists, but the hardworking staff of SF Open Studios and how they do this every year. I think it's especially important that young artists have been featured, especially from the southeast neighborhoods in this year's Open Studios, and I really commend the organizers for pulling in young people and community arts groups as well. But this weekend, November 8th and 9th, from 11 to 6 p.m., 11 a.m. to 6 p.m., please come out to support many of the Richmond District resident artists, as well as others, city artists from Fort Mason, the Marina, Pacific Heights, and Supervisor Farrell's district, Russian Hill, North Beach, and Supervisor Chu's district, Hayes Valley, Nopa, and the Haight, in Supervisor Breed's district, and also Buena Vista area as well. The Presidio, Sunset, West Portal, and Ocean View as well in other colleagues' districts. The works of the artists will be showcased in an array of locations in each of their respective neighborhoods. If you want the exact locations, you can either pick up one of the brochures, it's all free, or you can go to www.artspan.org for more of the locations. It goes Saturday and Sunday, and I wanted to encourage everyone to support our arts. They make our neighborhoods so vibrant and colorful. Thank you. The rest I'll submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Marr. Supervisor Tang.
Thank you. Colleagues, given that San Francisco is a city that celebrates and embraces diversity, equal access to our city services is incredibly important. Among the 21% of the total city population who self-identify as limited English speakers, 57% are Chinese speakers, and 23% roughly are Spanish speakers. According to a 2013 American Community Survey that analyzed data over a 5-year period, over 45% of San Franciscans over the age of 5 speak a language other than English at home. We have been such a great leader in improving accessibility of our services to all people. And so in 2001, our board enacted an equal access to services ordinance, which required that major public-facing departments provide language translation services to limited English proficiency individuals who comprise 5% or more of the city's total population. In 2009, under the leadership of Supervisor Chu, a number of significant changes were made to the ordinance, and it was renamed the Language Access Ordinance. And since it was amended, city departments have made a lot of improvements in providing services to people. So it's been 5 years since the passage of the LAO, and so it was my goal to revisit the LAO and ensure that there aren't any remaining gaps in language access for our city services. And especially with the addition of Tagalog as a certified language earlier this year, we wanted to make sure that we really do provide equal access to all of our residents. So to that end, I had requested a budget and analyst report, an analysis on language access services in our city.
specifically looking at our workforce and resource expenditures for language access services, identifying possible operational efficiencies in our provision of language access services, and evaluating an expanded role for the Office of Civic Engagement and Immigrant Affairs, also known as OSIA. And so I do encourage all of our board members to take a look at this analysis when it comes out, which will be released very shortly. So today I am introducing legislation to amend the LAO after many discussions with community organizations and various city departments on some of the challenges and improvements that are needed for language access. And I do want to thank Supervisor Chu for his co-sponsorship on this, given his previous role on the LAO. So specifically, this legislation will accomplish the following. It will remove the tiered system that we currently have over a phased-in 18-month period so that all city departments are providing equal access to city services in the various languages. It will centralize the complaint process with OSIA in collaboration and support from 311. It will streamline the reporting requirements for the department's annual compliance plan so that accurate and effective information is captured and we can figure out better how to address some of the gaps that there are. And it will require the translation of public signage and websites. And lastly, require OSIA to maintain a certified vendor pool for translation and interpretation services. So I think that all of these changes, we're looking forward to having a good conversation on this in committee. And I would like to, of course, thank the Budget Analysts Office for their work on this report, the members of the Language Access Network, in particular Grace Lee from Chinese for Affirmative Action, Adrienne Pon and her staff at OSIA as well. So again, I hope to get the support of all of our colleagues and just ensure that all San Franciscans have equal access to all of our city services. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Tang. Supervisor Wiener.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Colleagues, today I'm introducing a resolution relating to how the city treats owners of towed, stolen vehicles. A couple weeks ago, we held a hearing at the GAO committee to talk about this issue. We have a system right now under the current contract with Auto Return where if your car is stolen and then dumped somewhere in San Francisco and then towed, you have 20 minutes to retrieve it from a police officer, and if you don't get there within 20 minutes, the car is towed, taken to Auto Return. You're responsible for the tow fee. You receive a 4-hour grace period on storage fees, and if you don't make it by the 4 hours, which is not going to be very common, you start having to pay storage fees. Those fees can accrue and really grow in size and get to the point where in order to get your car out of the tow yard, you have to pay more than the value of the car if it's an older car, and so some people end up just abandoning their cars. This is really not the right way to treat people who have already been victimized by having their cars stolen, to force them to pay a significant amount of money just to get their car back. The city used to not charge owners of stolen vehicles to get their car back. There were fiscal decisions made to start charging them, and it's a really unfair system. The auto return contract goes out to bid early next year. It expires at the end of June. And of course, it has to be approved by the Board of Supervisors. And so I think this board should express to the MTA that in negotiating that contract, this issue must be dealt with. And whether that means waiving fees entirely for owners of stolen vehicles or providing a significantly longer grace period beyond the 4 hours and perhaps a reduced towing fee or a waived towing fee. There might be different ways of approaching it to make the contract more fair for these owners. I think we need to convey to the MTA that we expect this reform to be reflected in any contract that is coming to this board. And now is the time to express that view, not when the contract is fully negotiated and comes to committee or to the full board. And so I'm introducing a resolution today to put the Board of Supervisors on record requesting that the MTA address this issue as it negotiates the contract. And we want to make sure it does so in a way that does not end up reducing what the MTA earns from the contract, because we don't want to take money away from the MTA, but there are ways of doing that. So, colleagues, the rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Wiener. Supervisor Avalos. Supervisor Breed. Supervisor Campos.
Submit.
President Chu.
Submit.
Seeing no other names on the roster, that concludes the roll call for the introduction of new business.
Okay. With that, colleagues, why don't we now go to general public comment?
At this time, the public may comment generally for up to 2 minutes on items within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board, including items on the adoption without reference to committee calendar. Please note that public comment is not allowed on items which have already been subject to public comment at a board committee. Please direct your remarks to the board as a whole, not to individual supervisors nor to the audience. Speakers using translation assistance will be allowed twice the amount of time to testify, and if you would like a document to be displayed on the overhead projector, please clearly state such and remove the document when you would like the screen to return to live coverage of the meeting.
Board meeting, 2 p.m. I have a new philosophical saying, as I heard from the book I read. The book said of the diary of King Napoleon. The French King Napoleon once said, "I shall not waste my energy. Therefore, I'd rather be in loneliness. I shall not waste my distance to travel, and I shall not waste my time. In time, we compete for whole success, not with people."
Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. In the wake of the World Series victory, which should have been cause for pride and jubilation for the city of San Francisco, instead served as a sad reminder of the World Series of the world to see how ill-prepared and inadequately staffed it we are in performing crowd control. On Wednesday evening, the world witnessed our city shamed and embarrassed. Residential property damage, defacement of businesses with graffiti, public alcohol consumption, public urination, fire being discharged illegally, fireworks being discharged illegally, physical altercations, the setting of fires, and gun violence. These ensuing post-game mob scenes here in San Francisco painted a completely different score of sorts. With the unruly criminals, mobs blanketing San Francisco Police Department in a runaway shutdown. What did our city government do about this? They rewarded the city and fans with a victory parade, of course. Go figure. Most educators and parents know that you cannot promote healthy development and teach important life values to children if they are continually rewarded for their bad behavior. Why doesn't our city get this? The city and its executive staff should be held accountable for footing the bill for properties and bodily injuries caused as a result of the melee, when they had knowledge based on previous history that probability of ensuring management and violence and mayhem.
Thank you very much.
Well, apparently my video is going to be dead. If I could get possibly a clerk, the screen is quiet. Well, Mr. President, victims of the cabal, my name is Christopher Dahl, and I live at 6th and Howard, currently 14 meters and 10 blocks from sea level. I rise to comment on San Francisco pedestrians. We, the pedestrian, are a perishable lot. A couple more of us were bumped off a bumper, that is, a car bumper, and killed. One of them was part of the City Hall family, and the scene of the tragedy out front is among the screwiest pedestrian crossings in our city. Still, with care, it is manageable by drivers and pedestrians, but some drivers don't actually care. As you see from my video, they don't care enough to stay within the bounds of the law. They don't care enough to wait their turn. They don't have to care because no one is paying attention. There's no one on a motorcycle sitting waiting to summon bad drivers before a judge. There is no consequence for this high-risk behavior. There is no consequence until there is high damage behavior, until there is damage or injury or death. Your response has been something called Vision Zero, your dream of zero pedestrian deaths. When I hear this phrase, I immediately think of zero vision, as in blindness, as in the driver's blindness to the risks they put others to, as in your blindness to the facts of our daily lives. And when I hear this phrase, I see imagination zero, foresight zero, and action zero. Thank you, Mr. President.
Next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Yaman Salahi. I'm a staff attorney at the Asian Law Caucus. Thanks for the opportunity to speak today. We're here to support resolutions standing with Muslim and Arab communities in the face of anti-Arab and anti-Muslim bus advertisements. At ALC, we work closely with members of the Arab, Muslim, Middle Eastern, and South Asian communities who have been the victims of Islamophobic and racist campaigns. In addition to this victimization, in the post-9/11 environment, their civic engagement has been severely impinged and chilled, compounding the problem. As you all know, we've been here before. These bus ads have been peddled across the country and in San Francisco for years. When they first came here, San Francisco stood together and stood tall against such hate. Community members, 75 diverse Bay Area organizations, 35 diverse Bay Area leaders, Muni leadership, the Board of Supervisors, the District Attorney, and the Mayor of San Francisco all sent a clear message. The First Amendment may not allow San Francisco to reject these hateful bus ads, but the Bay Area is a diverse and welcoming community that stands with its Muslim and Arab communities in the face of hate. Now the advertisements are back. Fortunately, we know that San Francisco leaders will work with us to address any safety issues or discrimination that may arise after these hateful ads. By this resolution, you reaffirm your commitment to protect and include the Arab and Muslim communities in the San Francisco family. For that, we are thankful. We're also here to ask for just a little more as well. Hate speech, as in these ads, is not the only problem. There are also widespread attacks on Muslim and Arab civic engagement, which sometimes take the form of explicit hate speech like these advertisements, but other times take the form of attacking and vilifying those communities when they voice their dissent against government policies that affect them and their families. Both of these require your attention and support. Thank you again for your stand. We look forward to continue working with you.
Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Bryce Hammock. I am the Northern California Civil Rights Coordinator for the Council on American Islamic Relations. I'm here today representing the San Francisco Bay Area office, and I'd like to also comment on item 27, the anti-Arab, anti-Muslim bus ads. As many of you are aware, right now it's a very hostile climate for many American Muslims in this country due to events overseas in Iraq, Syria, Nigeria, even close to home in Canada, even out in Oklahoma. These activities and these acts of violence by groups claiming to be associated with Islam have in turn led to acts of violence and hate against American Muslims here in the United States and in the Bay Area. We had a brother who was murdered up in Sacramento because he was Muslim a few months ago. We have community members who have garbage thrown on them and are called terrorists in front of their kids. This morning down in Riverside County, a mosque had a gun fired at it while people were inside praying. We completely understand that the ads, as the ones that are placed on the buses, are protected by free speech, and we don't expect the city to forbid them in any shape or form. But we wanted to come here today and also say that we are proud of the response from the city, the SFMTA's response in placing counter ads showing what an acceptable and loving city San Francisco is. And the Board of Supervisors meeting today recommending this resolution and inviting us here to speak. We look forward to working with you and to fighting against this climate of hate and hostility toward American Muslims. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Carol Sanders, and I represent the Bay Area chapter of Jewish Voice for Peace. JVP Bay Area has about 9,000 supporters and about 200,000 nationally. We work for an end to Israel's occupation, for equal rights for all people in Israel-Palestine, and for compliance with international law. Recently, JVP launched a new project. It's called the Jewish Network Against Islamophobia. We did this because we saw in our work that Islamophobia is not limited to the kind of blatant hate speech that is emblazoned on the Geller bus ads. It can take different forms that can stir latent Islamophobia that lurks within much of our civil and political discourse at this time. One form, for example, is messaging that reduces the Amemsa community to the good Muslim and the extremist Muslim. The good Muslim does not dissent from mainstream framing of Middle Eastern affairs. So today we stand in support of the resolution condemning the Geller bus ads, and we look forward to working with you on further issues regarding Islamophobia. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, President Chu and supervisors. I have graphics here for the camera. My friend got me this book. It just shows San Francisco in the 60s there. That's Powell and Geary. Used to be a flower shop. There it is, a flower shop, yeah. Powell and Geary Street. And, oh, this is my hat. I got a voter hat from Farrell's, or Shakey's, signed by Tom Amiano when he ran for mayor. I'll put that there. There it goes. Tom Amiano there. Signed that when he was running for mayor. And Gov, exciting and new. Come aboard, voters, we're expecting you. The Gov vote, soon we'll be making another run. The Gov vote promises something for everyone. Set a course for adventure, your vote on a new city chance. And Gov won't hurt anymore. It's an open smile to a district shore. It's Gov love vote. Welcome aboard, it's love. Gov, good luck. Get your voter running. Head out to the polls now, looking for a candidate. Oh, big city gonna make it happen. Fire all of those ideas you don't want and make a good place. Like a city child, you were born to be wild. Get your voter running. Heavy metal thunder racing with the voting wind, and I hope you really win. Oh, big city gonna make it happen.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, my name is Nina Frankel. I represent myself as a resident and homeowner in the Richmond, and I came here to, voice my objection to the Planning Commission's decision to demolish a building on the corner of 26th and Clement.
Mr. President, that item, pardon me, ma'am, that item has not yet been heard.
You'll have an opportunity to speak on that item at the appropriate time. So we'll have...
Oh, I didn't know that. They put me in a line and told me that I could comment on anything. So, in fact, my time is short. Could I get my comment in?
You can actually comment at the appropriate time on that issue. You can speak about other subjects, but if there is a specific item that you are referring to, we need to hear that during the appropriate time.
Oh, dear, I didn't know that because I did ask someone in the line.
Okay.
Well, okay. Then as long as it's just a wild thing, I'll put my objection in later, but I would like to put in a plug for my continued
You have about 60 seconds left. We paused your time.
Okay, pardon?
We paused your time. You have about 60 seconds left.
Oh, I just wanted to say that I have been requesting more traffic control at 26 and Clement and 26 and Geary for about 3 years.
Not on that item, though, just on general public comment.
Well, no, I mean, it is a general thing which I'm puzzled as to why some intersections in the Richmond are getting traffic management, even though they don't seem to have a lot of traffic, and then others aren't, and ones that are very dangerous still have no control. So it's just something that I've been wondering about, and it would be nice if the ones that are really dangerous got some traffic management. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that wish to speak in general public comment? Sir, I think you already spoke. Thank you. Any other members? With that, general public comment is now closed. Why don't we first go to our adoption without committee reference, Madam Clerk?
Items 27 and 28 are being considered for immediate adoption without committee reference. Single roll call vote may enact these items. If a member objects, a matter can be removed and considered separately.
Colleagues, I'd like to sever item 27. If we could take a roll call on item 28 first.
On item 28, Supervisor Farrell.
Aye.
Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim. Kim, aye. Supervisor Marr. Marr, aye. Supervisor Tang.
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener.
Aye.
Wiener, aye. Supervisor Yee. Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos. Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed. Aye. Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos.
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Chu.
Aye.
Chu, aye. Supervisor Cohen.
Aye.
Cohen, aye. There are 11 ayes.
Thank you. These items are adopted. Madam Clerk, next item.
Item 27 is a resolution to support the Muslim and Arab communities in the face of the anti-Arab and anti-Muslim bus advertisements.
Thank you. President Chu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, I ask you with this item to stand with our Arab, Muslim, Middle Eastern, and South Asian communities in condemning the most recent bus advertisements that are targeting our local communities. 2 years ago, you will remember this board took a unanimous stand to condemn similar bus ads, and I think we all appreciate how unfortunate it is again that we are back in this situation. I ask that this board stand up again in condemning these ads, and I want to thank the members of the community that have come together in a significant and broad-based and diverse coalition to really stand with our local residents who have since 9/11 in 2001 been subjected to significant discrimination and hate crimes in the aftermath of that tragic event. So with that, colleagues, I ask for your support.
Thank you. Colleagues, can we take this item? Supervisor Wiener.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support this resolution. I think these ads are vile and disgusting, and I understand the First Amendment is what it is, and we know that the law is clear here that Muni cannot refuse to run these ads. It is unfortunate that our public buses have to be littered with these reprehensible and bigoted ads, and so I condemn them, and I will be supporting the resolution. I do just want to note that these are not the only ads of this nature that have run on Muni. Last year, or I can't remember exactly what it was when this happened the first time, I also stood with the community and in condemning these ads, and in fact the Jewish community came forward and stood with us to condemn these anti-Arab, anti-Muslim bus ads, and we did so in unity, and we requested that the MTA turn over or donate the proceeds from those ads to the Human Rights Commission, and the MTA in fact did that, which was a good thing. Shortly thereafter, anti-Israel ads went up on the buses in an organized campaign to delegitimize the state of Israel, which is a state that came into existence after 6 million Jews were murdered in Europe and after millennia of pogroms in Europe and elsewhere killing Jews. It came into existence as the only place on the planet where Jews knew that they could always go and be safe. When those ads went up, unfortunately we did not have unanimity on this board in terms of condemning them. In addition, the MTA declined to donate those proceeds to the Human Rights Commission despite a request via letter from, I believe it was 7 members of this board. I do believe that we should be consistent in condemning these ads, and again, the First Amendment, it is what it is and we have to respect it, but these ads are unacceptable nonetheless. And so again, colleagues, I will be supporting this resolution today.
Thank you, Supervisor Weiner. Supervisor Avalos.
Actually, I'll just keep my mouth shut.
Thank you, Supervisor Avalos. And with that, is there any more discussion? With that, let's take a roll call vote on this item.
On item 27, Supervisor Farrell. Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim. Kim, aye. Supervisor Marr.
Aye.
Marr, aye. Supervisor Tang.
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Weiner.
Aye.
Weiner, aye. Supervisor Yee. Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos. Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed. Aye. Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos.
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Chu.
Aye.
Chu, aye. Supervisor Cohen. Aye. Cohen, aye. There are 11 ayes.
The resolution is adopted. And with that, colleagues, when we now go to our 3 p.m. special orders, Madam Clerk, could you take the first item, items 13 to 16?
Items 13 through 16 comprise a special order at 3 p.m. for a public hearing of persons interested in the September 4th, 2014 Planning Commission's approval of a conditional use authorization to demolish 2 residential units on property within the Outer Clement Street Neighborhood Commercial District located at 395 26th Avenue. Items 14 through 16 are the motions approving or disapproving the Commission's decisions and the preparation of findings.
Supervisor Marr.
Thank you, President Chu. Colleagues, both parties have agreed to continue this item given that it's Election Day and our attention may be focused elsewhere. And they have agreed to continue this until November 25th. And I know that that's already a packed meeting, and my apologies for that, but both parties have agreed on that date. So I move to continue this item until November 25th.
Okay, Supervisor Marr has made a motion to continue. Is there a second to that? Second by Supervisor Campos. Let me see if there's any public comment on whether we should continue this item to that date, particularly for members of the public that may not be able to come on that date who may want to say a few words.
Again, now I'm back. I think it's legitimate time.
This is the right time.
It is the right time. Okay, fine. I'm Nina Frankel. I live in the Richmond, across the street from that building, and I would just like to voice my objection to there are a couple of things. One, the proposed building is not contributing to any more affordable housing, as far as I know. Secondly, parking, it's a commercial area. Clement between 25th and 26th has 4 or 5 restaurants, small neighborhood restaurants. People come from all over to those restaurants. And parking is already at a premium. This building, with its luxury apartments for multi-residents, is putting in only 6 parking places, and parking is already chaotic. All of us around have problems with people parking in our driveway all of the time. And the Richmond doesn't need this, and it doesn't seem to me that it contributes to any form of neighborhood pleasantries. And furthermore, in the absence of any traffic management at that corner, which is already extremely hazardous, it will simply make it worse because people will not be able to see what's coming in and out of the driveways depending on where they are. So that's what and I'm just putting in my 2 bits now because I don't think I could come at the next meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Hello, my name is John Hatton, and I'm speaking against the conditional use authorization for the particular corner because I live in the neighborhood, I live a block away, and there's just too many cars. I don't want to see our neighborhood go, as other neighborhoods have, into high rises and it's just not right. We need what we have. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wish to speak in this public comment period? Seeing none, public comment is closed. And with that, Supervisor Marr has made a motion to continue these 2 items, items 13 through 16 to the 25th of November, seconded by Supervisor Campos. Colleagues, can we do that without objection? Without objection, that should be the case. Madam Clerk, could you call the second 3 p.m. special order, items 17 to 21?
Items 17 through 20 comprise the special order at 3 p.m. for a public hearing of persons interested in the September 11th, 2014 Planning Commission's approval of a conditional use authorization for the construction of 3 new dwelling units located at 115 Telegraph Hill Boulevard. Items 18 through 20 are the motions approving or disapproving the Commission's decisions and the preparation of findings.
Colleagues, this is an item as indicated in the agenda where we would entertain a motion to continue all these items to coincide with a companion CEQA appeal so we can join the conditional use authorization of 115 Telegraph Hill Boulevard to that time. Could I have a motion to continue? So motion by Supervisor Marr, seconded by Supervisor Farrell. Are there any members of the public that wish to speak with regards to this motion to appeal in public comment? Seeing none, public comment is closed. With that, colleagues, if we could take the motion to continue this item, these items 17 through 20 to November the 18th, do that without objection. That should be the case. And with that, Madam Clerk, could you call the third 3 p.m. special order, items 21 through 24?
Items 21 through 24 comprise the special order at 3 p.m. for a public hearing of persons interested in the September 18th Planning Commission's approval of a conditional use authorization to allow a micro-wireless telecommunication services facility operated by AT&T Mobility to be located at 431 Balboa Street. Item 22 is the motion to approve the Commission's decision for the conditional use authorization. Item 23 is a motion to disapprove the decision. Item 24 is a motion to direct the clerk to prepare findings.
Supervisor Marr.
Thank you, colleagues. I did try to seek a continuance of this item, but the main appellant did not want to. They're all here, and Mr. John Umabuko is here, and other neighbors from the Richmond district, the inner Richmond area. This is a proposal that for an AT&T Mobility macro wireless telecommunications facility, it will, from my understanding, be on the roof of, I don't know if any of you know where Sushi Bistro is, near 6th and Balboa. It's very close to my house as well. And the facility would be on the roof within a first floor room. And it's based on and the proposed facility is a location preference 5 site on a mixed use building in a high density district, according to our WTS facility siting guidelines. And the proposed antennas would either measure approximately 55 inches high by 7 inches wide and 12 inches thick, or 48 inches high by 29 inches wide and 10 inches thick, and will be located in 3 separate areas or sectors. And again, it's in an area with a number of either childcare or schools. Macappan Elementary is very close by as well. Also a number of restaurants and key transit area as well. I wanted to also say that some of the residents from my district have raised concerns of whether it's necessary and desirable, and I'm looking forward to hearing from the testimony from my neighborhood, but also from the planning department as well, and AT&T as well. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. We have in front of us the appeal of the conditional use authorization for this project at 431 Balboa. For this hearing, we will consider whether the Planning Commission's conditional use authorization to allow a macro wireless telecommunications services facility to be installed at this location was valid. As we typically do, we will proceed as follows. We'll give the appellant up to 10 minutes for a presentation, followed by 2 minutes per speaker from the public in support of the appeal. We'll then hear for up to 10 minutes for a presentation from the Planning Commission, and then we'll hear from the project sponsor for up to 10 minutes, and then hear from speakers that oppose the appeal for up to 2 minutes, and then finally we'll hear a rebuttal by the appellant. So with that, unless there are any further comments by the district supervisor, why don't we proceed to the appellant?
Good afternoon, President Chu, fellow supervisors. My name is Dr. John Omekbo, and I am before you as the appellant, representing not only myself, but many of my fellow residents, and I would like all those who are here in support of my appeal to please stand up and be recognized. Thank you very much. We have many other supporters who could not be here today, but have signed petitions in opposition against this project. We are appealing the Planning Commission's approval of the conditional use authorization for placement of AT&T cellular towers at 431 Balboa Street. We are asking you to reverse the decision based on the grounds that there is no coverage gap and the many negative impacts to our community with the installation of 9 cellular towers emitting 11,000 watts of power to satisfy a coverage gap over an area of 10 square city blocks. AT&T alleges that there are coverage gaps in voice and data over peak periods. We are challenging that premise with our own independent analysis, and our data do not substantiate this claim. We utilized an FCC-approved application and took 8 samples during peak times on Sunday and Monday and found no coverage gap. The data will be presented later in testimony. We also have many AT&T users amongst us, and they can testify that they do not experience significant drops in performance or slowness in performance on their cell phones. This project also has many negative impacts, and one of them is to the safety of the neighborhood. It is in direct opposition to Planning Code Section 303, which states, "The proposed project will not be detrimental to the health, safety, convenience, or general welfare of the persons residing or working in the vicinity." Also, it is in direct opposition to the general plan, Human Needs Objective 4, which states improvement of the neighborhood environment to increase personal safety, comfort, pride, and opportunity. My argument is based on statements by the engineering consultant Hammack and Edison, as well as the Department of Public Health review of cellular antenna proposal, which both state that workers should not have access to within 32 feet of the front of the antenna while they are in operation. Appropriate RF safety training be provided to all authorized personnel, marking prohibited access areas with red paint stripes and worker notification areas with yellow paint stripes on the roof in front of antenna, and posting signs at the roof access ladder, barricades on screens in front of the antenna, which would be readily visible from any angle of approach to persons who might need to work within that distance, would be sufficient to meet FCC adopted guidelines. I wish to show you a diagram which demonstrates this 32-foot hazard area. This is Balboa Street. The red circle is 32 feet in front where the front antennas would be emitting forward. The purple circle is to the west of the 3 antennas located here. And the yellow circle depicts where the scatter would be 32 feet south to the rear. Now, these 9 towers will be emitting RF radiation 32 feet in this hazard zone directly into residents' backyards, patios, rear porches, as well as into the street. Why is it that there are no safety precautions or notifications for the public or the residents? They are being exposed without their knowledge. Why are there 2 standards, one for workers, but none for the public? I find this totally irresponsible. We are in this predicament because in residential areas, the houses are so close in proximity with walls touching each other that this hazard zone is inevitable. Cell towers do not belong in residential areas. If the WTS siting guidelines were better adhered to with safety concerns first, as opposed to the least intrusive means to close the coverage gap, we might not be having this appeal. AT&T has their priorities wrong. Why? Simple. They did not engage the community. AT&T legal counsel stated, quote, AT&T also held a community outreach meeting to meet with nearby residents to answer their questions and to consider their thoughts and suggestions for the site. In this way, AT&T made sure to select the least intrusive means to close its coverage gap, end of quote. That meeting was held in 2012, and 3 people attended, hardly representative of the 200 property owners who live within the 300-foot radius. Why was there such a poor showing? Quite obvious. No one was properly notified. Everyone I have talked to could not remember this notification. And within the 2 years, there has been a total lack of community engagement with AT&T until the past 2 months when their application was approved by the Planning Commission and the community was all aware of it. Next, I want to mention that there is negative effect on housing by restricting development. Both the General Plan Housing Element Objective 12, Policy 12.3 states ensure new housing is sustainably supported. Also, Planning Code Section 101.1b states that the city's supply of affordable housing be preserved and enhanced. Both of these standards were negated by this project because one of our property owners was planning on building an apartment complex, but with the cell tower aimed directly at her property, she is reconsidering this option. Also, property owners that are in the direct 32-foot hazard zone will be unable to develop their property as well. We feel there's going to be negative impact on businesses. There's a restaurant immediately below the towers and an outdoor cafe across the street. They will suffer once patrons know that there are cell towers aimed directly at them. People may not want to walk the sidewalks underneath these towers. There is a negative impact to property values in that a seller must disclose to buyers that there are cellular towers nearby or be at risk to be sued if not disclosed. And finally, I would like to say that there are some compliance issues with this building. There are building code violations in that the current building, which is permitted for single-family residents, has 4 families living there. And we also find fire code violations in that there are no fire escapes at the rear of the building. So in conclusion, we feel that we have significant grounds to reverse this decision by the Planning Commission that was done on September 18th. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Marr.
Yeah, Dr. Uma Kubo, is that how you pronounce
Yes.
it? Can I just ask you, my understanding is that there is a Peters Place Child Care Center on 4th Avenue, and there's a Balboa Preschool on 6th Avenue right there at Balboa, in addition to Cinderella Bakery with a lot of outdoor tables right across the street from the site.
Yes.
Is that right?
That's correct.
And then McCoppin School is right there on 6th Avenue where my daughter went.
Correct.
And so a lot of children and others are in the vicinity in addition to the homeowners. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And when you had the independent analysis of whether there's a gap in coverage, when was that data taken?
We just did it 2 days ago, Sunday and Monday.
And then the diagram that you show with the colored circles, that's based on the location of the antennas and the direction that they're facing as well. Is that right?
32 feet, correct.
Okay, very
correct.
good.
Yes.
And then for the community meeting that was pretty much not attended by anyone, and you said 3 showed up, were you and the homeowners notified of that meeting in 2012?
No one can remember that notification.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Colleagues, any other questions to the appellant? Okay, at this time, let's hear from members of the public that support the appellant.
Good afternoon. I live in the neighborhood of 431 Balboa. I love technology. I carry 2 cell phones myself. But there are a couple of things that I wanted to point out in the application that stood out. One was the coverage gap. So we used the FCC test app and measured the throughput on multiple sites that were said to have coverage deficiency, and noticed that we were well above the national average, in some cases up to like 7 Mbps throughput. And these were done at peak hours, again, in times that were claimed to have bad service. And some of the exhibits that were given in the application also lacked proper axes, like it just said Saturday and Sunday and nothing on this side. It just showed higher and lower, and nobody really knows what that means other than it's an exhibit that shows a graph. So we took this test seriously, and all this data gets uploaded up to FCC, so it's available for them to look at it too. That's the first thing that's wrong, that there was a service gap, and that's caused reject, in my opinion. And the second thing is the application is applying for the entire spectrum from 700 megahertz to 2,170 odd megahertz. So what this means is it is not just AT&T's spectrum block, but it's the entire spectrum block of any cell phone provider. If you do realize that there's a lot of trading going on with cell phone towers and subleasing of this, AT&T itself was involved in a $4.5 billion deal last year. So this seems like it's more of a land grab and trying to get towers in there for speculative trading rather than for service coverage gap. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
My name is Michael Murphy. I live at 625 6th Avenue. I would like to address the interpretation of the portion of the 1996 FCC Act, now codified in 47 U.S.C. Section 332C. First, my qualifications. For about 20 years, I worked as a research attorney for the Court of Appeal, initially for Judge William Newsom, then for Judge Swagger. In the past 10 years, I have written 8 law review articles in important journals, including the Delaware Journal of Corporate Law, the NYU Journal of Law and Business, the Virginia Law and Business Review, and the Business Lawyer, a peer-reviewed publication of the American Bar Association. The critical point I want to make relates to the familiar principle that statutes should be interpreted to uphold their constitutionality. If Section 332C is given a broad and unwarranted interpretation, it would encroach on our constitutional right of petition. Fortunately, the statute lends itself to a common sense interpretation that avoids this conflict. The right of petition applies not only to the petitions in the common sense, but also guarantees access to the courts and administrative agencies. More generally, it protects an individual's right to challenge abusive and misguided exercise of all government instrumentalities. It lies at the heart of our democratic traditions. Now, what does Section 332C say? It recognizes the authority of the government over the placement of local government, or over the placement of wireless service facilities. Then it adds a caveat. Local governments cannot seek to regulate radio frequency emissions on the basis of their environmental effects if the emissions comply with FCC regulations. Nope.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you. Your time is up, actually. Thank you. Sure, that is fine. You can provide a copy to us. We'll include that in the record. Thank you, sir. Are there any other members of the public that wish to speak in public comment? Please.
Good afternoon, President Chu and fellow supervisors. My name is Carol Pergidas, and I live at 614 6th Avenue. I live there with my husband and 2 boys. Our backyard borders the western side of 431 Balboa, the proposed site for the 9 towers. I'd like to show you how close we are. This is a view from our deck. This is 431 Balboa. And that's the view from our bedroom on the 2nd floor. This is the roof of 431 Balboa. I'd like to point out that AT&T states in its proposal that they will put up a locked screen enclosure to the rooftop antennas, provide RF safety training to personnel authorized to go near the antennas, and that no access within 32 feet directly in front of the antennas will be allowed while the base station is in operation. In addition, AT&T states that it will post prohibited access signage on and near the roof to warn anyone from getting close to the antennas. In other words, AT&T recognizes the dangers of being in proximity to these antennas and will take precautionary measures to protect the safety of its workers. What I would like to know is, what are the precautionary measures to protect the residents of the neighborhood, like me, my husband, and our 2 children who live next door to the antennas? Where are the measures to protect our safety? We've had no instructions on how to safeguard ourselves, even though our property falls into the 32-foot range in front of the antennas that was deemed so dangerous for authorized personnel to go near. Clearly, AT&T perceives a hazard of being in the same space, but it only cares about the hazards posed to its workers, not to the residents. These workers will only be there for a short amount of time. On the other hand,
Thank you very much. Let's hear from the next speaker. And if there are other members of the public that wish to speak on this, if you could please line up on the right-hand side of the board chamber.
President Chu and supervisors, good afternoon. My name is Sophie Lau, and I'm the property owner of immediate adjacent to this subject property of 431 Balboa Street, and my property starts at 437 to 449 Balboa Street. I'm here in front of you try to express our feeling that we definitely want to oppose the approval of this conditional use permit, and we're here to support the appeal. I'd like to show you the diagram. The subject building is right there, and the one next to it is exactly ours. Now we have 7 commercial stores currently, but it is within the partnership that our intention is to build another 3 to 4 story. So we will be creating low housing, commercial store for the area. And my concern is this. I understand the safety zone is 32 feet. Can you imagine, once we build our building, anywhere from 3 to 4 story? I'll make it short. And so the safety issue, 32 feet, we're within that. And then another issue is the notification process, which most of the property owner never got notice until I just learned about this last week. Thirdly, and as that will reduce the housing, people will not rent in this area, which we are just decreasing the housing stock. And lastly, I want to say,
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Thank you, everyone, for me an opportunity to talk to you. This is the same picture that she showed, and I want to tell you this is unacceptable building for this AT&T tower. You can see that the building is from here to here. It's not ended there. It still have longer because you cannot see. I can see, and I'm going to show you the pictures here. This is the back of the building, and you can see that the building is already extended to every corner, every inches of the property line. And there is no windows, no doors, no fire escape, no skylight for these people that cooking heavily in the below this. You can see that the kitchen van, 3 of them, big van, and you can tell this is a heavy kitchen that cooking, and there is no fire escape for these people. And this is taken from my backyard. And I also want to show you next picture that taken from my bedroom. You can see that Dr. John Umekabo house there from their bedroom. You can see how close it is. And then I need to tell you this, the other side of the building. And also I want to tell you this illegal modify on this building. They're putting 4 families in the building. And I searched on the planning. They only allow 2 families developing. They make it 4 families. And you can see the doorbell and the mailbox. And also I want to point it out, the trash can. All the trash can in the hallway and the children.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Thank you for your time today. We appreciate it. It's important to us. We've come together because it really matters to the community. This is a funny little picture, but here you can see the top of Sushi Bistro, and in black lines, I drew where the towers are. Not a great community, not a great view, but from there you can see the top of St. Ignatius. And that's going to detract from the view. In the pictures they showed you, they showed the towers, but they're not showing you the green fences that are going up behind it. In addition, they're going to tilt those towers downward. They are going to hit the ground at 37.5 feet. The safe distance is 32 feet. Anyone over 5.5 feet tall is going to be exposed to radio frequency radiation above the FCC standards. In addition, the back of this house has a backyard that's been permitted because they were allowed to go up 2 floors. The backyard is not at floor level. It is at minimum 8 to 10 feet above ground level, putting their backyard within 27.5 feet at the ground level of that radiation frequency. Again, this is not safe. Lastly, something they're not discussing is the support equipment that's going to Sushi Bistro. This support equipment is going to have to take up square footage that is currently allowed for occupancy, so they're going to have to reoccupy. It's also a potential for a fire hazard. This backup generator needs 3 feet of space around it, and if you work on it, you have to work on a dry floor. It is going to be near ovens, deep fryers, in an environment that's not safe for people to be eating food, let alone the houses that are touching this building that could also go down if this catches fire. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that wish to speak in public comment in support of the appellant? Seeing none, that public comment period is closed, and why don't we now proceed to a presentation by planning.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. My name is Anne-Marie Rogers. I'm the Senior Policy Advisor for the Planning Department, and I'm joined today by Omar Masri, who's the project planner for this. As you've heard, this is a conditional use authorization for a WTS, or cell phone antenna facility. And for today, your decision before you is the same question that was asked at the Planning Commission. Is this project at this location necessary or desirable, and is it compatible with the community? The Commission based their findings of necessary, desirable, and compatible on the siting and the design of the facility, as well as requirements that have grown out of past hearings here at the Board of Supervisors. In the past, this board has been concerned that the city had no way to determine if a WTS facility was truly needed for capacity reasons. The Commission now requires third-party analysis that's independent of the carrier's wireless capacity prior to the hearing. This third-party analysis has at times shown that some projects were not necessary, but that was not the case here. This report found the area to be in need of better service, primarily with respect to indoor coverage, particularly with respect to data capacity. Further, the Commission determined that the facility would be compatible with the community based on the design and the absence of any significant impacts. Mr. Masri will now walk you through the project and respond to the appellant's stated concerns.
First, let's discuss the project. A conditional use authorization is required to install the wireless facility. This project includes 9 panel antennas on the roof of a 3-story building that contains a mix of uses in an NC2 zoning district, along the Balboa Street corridor within the inner Richmond. The panel antennas will be installed in the roof with 3 antennas with an individual faux vent pipes, 3 antennas behind a vertical expansion at the front parapet, and 3 antennas behind wood lattice screening at the rear roof. Electronic equipment necessary to operate the facility will be located on the roof and the ground floor. No diesel generator or other generators are proposed as part of this project. Second, this site is a mixed-use commercial building in a neighborhood commercial zoning district, one of the preferred locations identified in the city's wireless facility siting guidelines. The city has 5 preferred location types for wireless facilities, as well as limited preference and disfavored sites. This site is a preferred site type. As required by the wireless guidelines, the carrier provided a comprehensive alternative site analysis indicating why other sites, such as nearby buildings, would not meet the carrier's objectives, such as providing sufficient height or line of sight for signal propagation. I'd be happy to discuss other locations in more detail if the board wishes. So let's move on to the conditional use authorization and the determination of whether the project is necessary or desirable and is compatible with the neighborhood. First, necessity. AT&T conducted drive tests to establish that additional coverage is needed here. This site is intended in part to replace a nearby microsite, which cannot handle data capacity needs for the area. This demand and capacity gap is based on a number of factors, including the demand for high-speed data services. Microsites typically feature 2 antennas, each the size of a baseball bat. They are usually approved administratively, which is of advantage to the carrier, but have far more limited range compared to macro sites. Macro sites, such as one proposed here, typically feature between 3 to 16 panel antennas, with each antenna about the size of a parking meter, and provide greater range and capacity compared to micro sites. This site's approval limits the facility to only 9 panel antennas. Any increase in the number of panel antennas would require a new public hearing. Second, compatibility. If I could have the overhead slide, please. The Commission's approval is based on multiple compatibility findings. First, the Commission found that the placement of antennas and related support and protection features would be located, designed, and treated architecturally so as to minimize their visibility from public spaces. The Commission found this placement would avoid intrusion into public vistas, avoid disruption of the architectural design integrity of the building, and ensure harmony with the neighborhood character. Furthermore, the development of well-designed and scale-appropriate macro wireless facilities, typically on building rooftops in San Francisco, tends to result in fewer antennas and a better design response. When carriers cannot place macro antennas on buildings, they will often seek approval to place multiple antennas in equipment boxes attached to wooden utility poles within the public right-of-way. State law provides the city less ability to regulate design and siting of these projects when placed in the public right-of-way, as shown in the overhead. Keep in mind, if the board approves a conditional use authorization today, there will be additional review still ahead. If ultimately approved, the carrier would be required to submit building permits for review by the Public Health Department, the Department of Building Inspection, and Fire Department. If plans are approved, field inspections would be required before the antennas could be activated. If the site is activated, the carrier must then perform field testing to make sure the antennas meet federal rules related to RF emissions. Residents can ask that their units be tested, whether by an engineer hired by the carrier or by the city's Department of Public Health, which maintains monitoring tools, at no charge, and standardized field testing must occur every 2 years. I would note as well that the panel antennas do have a standoff distance, but that standoff distance of approximately 30 feet assumes a worst-case scenario of all of the antennas operating maximum capacity, which is not a typical field condition. In addition, that standoff distance of approximately 30 feet drops significantly as you move away from the antennas with regard to vertical orientation. So that same 30-foot standoff would not apply if you're directly underneath the antennas as they push their energy outward with a slight, roughly 2-degree down tilt. In conclusion, today's hearing is to consider if the city's existing laws and guidelines were properly administered for this conditional use authorization. In this case, the Commission found that the application meets all of the criteria outlined in the city's wireless guidelines and the planning code, and then voted unanimously to approve the conditional use authorization. The board now must review the evidence that was before the Commission, as well as new evidence you have received, and make its own determination about the necessity or desirability and compatibility of this project in this location. The Department respectfully requests that the board uphold the conditional use authorization. Thank you.
Colleagues, any questions? Supervisor Marr.
Again, I'm going to do my best to be as brief as I can. Mr. Masri, can I just ask, so on the necessity, you're saying based on the third-party study that, and I'm appreciative that we're doing that now, you looked at the data provided by the third-party analyst, and that included, I believe you said, this as a macro site that would help kind of the gap that you said the study showed. You also emphasize that there's multiple compatibility reasons that you cited, and one is less intrusive to have these 9 antennas on the roof and on the ground floor than to have a number of poles that we have no control over and that AT&T has the discretion to put up in the right-of-way along streets, for example, right outside of Cinderella Bakery or other spots in the area. But could you give that analysis again of what the alternative would be if this were rejected?
Speaking the last part first, if this were rejected, the carrier could choose to pursue different sites within the neighborhood. They could also pursue the path of what are known as distributed antenna systems, which are the antennas and equipment boxes typically mounted to wooden utility poles, which are particularly concerned in San Francisco, where you often have bay windows for residents, sometimes 2 feet outside from those poles, or 2 feet from those poles. State law, referred to as Public Utilities Code Section 7901, severely constrains our ability to have jurisdiction over the siting, for instance, even requiring any third-party review, which we don't do for the nodes on the wooden utility poles, and constrains our ability to dictate certain design or placement methods for those poles when placed in the public right-of-way. The third-party review is a process that we've implemented since 2011 at the board's direction. It's worked fairly well for us. We don't actually review the data provided by the carrier. Oftentimes the engineer will review that data after they signed a non-disclosure agreement and then provide that analysis. One of the bigger challenges we're seeing now is that with the drive for mobile data coverage, as well as indoor coverage for mobile data, carriers are often seeking to place more antennas closer into our residential and neighbor commercial districts. So it creates more of a challenge to sort of balance those demands and the federal preemptions with community concerns about design, RF safety, as well as impacts as far as neighbor businesses.
And you mentioned that the gap is partially indoor coverage given the new uses for wireless devices. And could you comment also on the independent study done by the residents, because they say that they counter the independent study and that there is no gap as well?
We weren't provided a copy of that study. The FCC has released their own mobile application, but it has not been vetted by any of the carriers to our satisfaction in terms of what it means as far as their networks and capability. We do see that there's a microsite in the neighborhood for AT&T just about 500 feet away, and the carriers are indicating that these sites don't meet their current needs. It's a challenge for us determining what their data needs are and where our threshold is. We continue to seek to engage with the carriers and look at smaller designs, smaller facilities, maybe more ubiquitous in order to sort of balance that issue.
And then as an alternative to those 9 panel antennas, I believe they are, how many poles would have to be constructed with the alternative devices? How many poles are we talking about that would be an alternative?
I would defer to AT&T on an estimate, but typically we'll see between 4 to 12 different poles for an area where you don't see a macro site. If you were to look, say, in the outer Richmond and outer Sunset areas.
And it's likely they would be sited along Balboa.
Correct. They would oftentimes try to place them looking up and down main streets, such as Balboa, and then obviously as well down the avenues.
And those poles might even be closer to Peter's Place, the child care facility, or the Balboa preschool, or McCoppin even than what's proposed on top of Sushi Bistro's building.
It's likely, but it would vary based on each carrier's needs for coverage and or capacity.
Okay. And then can you explain again the standoff distance? Because I know the residents were concerned about that distance, but you explained, I think, pretty clearly how it's a conservative estimate and that there doesn't seem to be the danger that the residents fear. But could you just explain?
So when the RF study is completed as part of the pre-approval process, as part of the approval process, that study assumes that every antenna is operating at maximum capacity, offering all different bands of service, whether voice or data, at a certain time and takes into account any antennas that would be at the site as well for another carrier if another carrier was there. When that study is done, it assumes a worst case scenario and then bases that 30-foot standoff based on that. Now, that 30-foot standoff is based on the antennas propagating energy outward. These antennas don't generally propagate energy in a manner that would resemble, say, something like Epcot Center. They're trying to push energy outward, oftentimes they're trying to look down main streets. And so as one is below the antennas, that energy level drops significantly. So it's hypothetical. You could be in a building, the site gets turned on that same day. You have, for instance, AT&T cell phone coverage, but you wouldn't see an improvement unless there was reflection off adjacent buildings for the signal. When we've done field testing with our Department of Public Health, we've generally seen that the field results of the RF emissions fall substantially below what is the worst case scenario predicted. And we have not seen a pattern for the over 900 facilities in San Francisco of these facilities exceeding those FCC guidelines or approaching anywhere near that limit.
And my last question is on the noticing of the community. It seems that AT&T did not do a good enough job to get even a respectable number of people at the community meeting. Does the planning department follow up to make sure that the applicant is doing their due diligence to let people know? Because it doesn't seem like that was done.
We worked to improve the process. As part of every wireless facility since 2003, we require a public notice be sent out to all residents within 500 feet instead of 300 feet, as well as all registered neighborhood groups. Those neighborhood groups register with the planning department. And we made sure that was accomplished. Over time, we've asked that the carriers indicate on the front of the envelope that they sent out the words invitation to a community meeting in both English, Spanish, and Chinese, and also put up posters of the community meeting at the site location as well. We've generally seen instances where this has been an issue, but we've looked back and seen that residents were sent a letter. It has not been a challenge.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Colleagues, any other questions to the planning department? Okay, seeing none at this time, let's now hear from the project sponsor.
Good afternoon, President Chu, members of the Board of Supervisors. My name is Teddy Verhees, and I'm Director of External Affairs for AT&T. On September 18th of this year, the Planning Commission voted unanimously to approve AT&T's mobility conditional use authorization to place 9-panel screened rooftop antennas at 431 Balboa Street. I'm going to put this picture up for you real quick here. The top one first. So this is the site as it exists today, and there we go. Here's the site on the bottom as proposed. We have 3 antennas behind this faux extension of the parapet, 3 antennas included in a 20-inch faux vent pipes, and 3 antennas off the rear of the property on a mechanical faux penthouse. On October 16th, an appeal was filed on the grounds that, quote, I object to the placement of 9 antennas on a mixed-use building in a residential neighborhood, end of quote. The appellant has repeatedly failed, first at the Planning Commission and again before you today on appeal, to provide any evidence challenging the need or appropriateness of AT&T's proposed facility at 431 Balboa Street. There simply is no evidence, there's no basis, and there's no indication of a problem with the Planning Commission's unanimous approval. The Commission rightfully determined that the project was both necessary and desirable and compatible with the neighborhood, and that AT&T established the need for the proposed facility, demonstrated that the facility would enhance wireless coverage in the area, and that it was compatible with the existing building and surrounding neighborhood. To quickly review for this board, first on the matter of necessity, AT&T's radio frequency expert Michael Caniglia explains in a statement attached to AT&T's application that AT&T has an existing capacity gap in its wireless service in the area roughly bordered by Anza, 3rd Avenue, Cabrilla Street, and 8th Avenue. Depicted here in the photo. Per direction of the Board of Supervisors in 2011, on August 12th of this year, the city's independent consultant, registered professional engineer, Bill Hammett of Hammett and Edison, issued his certified report summarizing his concurrence with AT&T's significant gap information and conclusions. That report was included in AT&T's application and is part of the record. Mr. Hammett is here today and is available to address any questions you might have as it relates to the research and his analysis. Given the weight of the evidence, the Planning Commission concluded that AT&T had in fact met its burden and shown through its engineer and confirmed through an independent licensed engineer that a necessity does indeed exist. On the matter of whether the site is desirable and compatible with the neighborhood, the Planning Commission again recognized that AT&T has worked diligently with planning staff and with the community for over 2 years to develop the most appropriate and least intrusive means to close its significant service gap in coverage. What qualifies as least intrusive is based on the city's code. The proposed site is a Preference 5 preferred location, as Mr. Masri stated, under the city's wireless telecommunications guidelines. As required by the city on all Preference 5 locations, AT&T conducted an extensive site analysis consisting of 58 properties in the surrounding area. AT&T ultimately selected this preferred location because of its zoning, height, and location, allowing for optimal signal propagation and thus addressing the coverage gap by the least intrusive means possible. In short, there is no other available location from which AT&T feasibly can close its coverage gap by a least intrusive means. Having shown that there is a significant gap in AT&T service coverage in the area of 431 Balboa Street, and that it proposes to close the gap by the least intrusive means, the Planning Commission's unanimous approval is supported by substantial evidence and consistent with city, state, and federal law. Before closing today, I want to recognize that a lot of the comments that I hear today, and I also heard at the Planning Commission, center around safety and radio frequency. The concern about health effects of radio frequency emissions is contradicted by the evidence. Here it is beyond dispute that the proposed equipment will operate well below applicable FCC limits. An engineering analysis for the proposed facility was performed by Hammett and Edison and concludes that the proposed facility will operate well within and actually far below the applicable FCC public and occupational exposure limits. This report was also reviewed and signed off by the city's Department of Public Health. To the extent such facilities comply with the FCC regulations concerning such emissions, it cannot be used as a basis to support a denial, or in this case, an appeal. In conclusion, AT&T has shown that there is a significant gap in coverage in its personal wireless service. Furthermore, it has demonstrated in its application and the alternative site analysis that the proposed facility is, in fact, the least intrusive means by which to close this gap. AT&T is diligently trying to upgrade its network to meet the growing wireless communication demands within San Francisco, and it is doing so in a manner that takes prudent and careful consideration of the aesthetic impacts of its facilities and the values that the city seeks to promote. AT&T's proposed design is fully consistent with city land use regulations and its general plan. We ask that you affirm the Planning Commission's decision approving the conditional use authorization and deny the appeal. Thank you for your time today.
Supervisor Marr.
Yeah, really quickly, Ms. Rehas, could you respond to the neighborhood's concerns about not having any notice, and many of them saying they didn't receive the notice and only a couple people going to the meeting in 2012? Because I think there are real fears that people have and real concerns about it, the necessity and the compatibility and the desirability of the 9-panel antennas on that building.
Certainly, I'm happy to. So we send out our notices and we send copies of all of the addresses and the notice to the Planning Department. It's included in the record. Supervisor, you know I can't force people to come to community meetings. The radio services is an independent third-party vendor that we hire to do that mailing. We don't do it in-house. And I think that's why we have another meeting at the Planning Commission so that people have an opportunity to be heard. And the necessity standard has met. The desirable and compatible standard has been met through the alternative site analysis. And when that happens, the burden of the carrier has been met. And the FCC has said there's very little left in terms of a burden on the carrier to.
Yeah, but Teddy, I know that when in past antenna proposals, when I've attended community meetings, they've been full, like the one at the Jewish Educational Center several years ago or others, and the effort that you made was commendable in that case. But this one seems that the neighborhood didn't have any notice, and I think there are real legitimate concerns that people are having. But let me just ask one other question. If we as a board were to deny this condition or to overturn the Planning Commission's conditional use permit, would AT&T resort to those right-of-way on the street poles to achieve the coverage of the gap that you said exists?
So AT&T, I'll remind Mr. Masri, AT&T does not even have an approved DAS, distributed antenna design, approved by the city of San Francisco. So at this point, we wouldn't. This is a pretty clear case. We've met our burden. I think we would pursue legal means to pursue this site. We've been waiting 2 years. Our federal shot clock is 150 days. If we had notice through Omar, we work very closely with the planning department. As soon as he gets wind that there's opposition coming before the planning commission, just as we did, for example, at CCDC, right before we had our community meeting, we held a separate meeting for 3 or 4 hours just to address those concerns. We didn't have that in this case. We didn't have people reaching out. This is the first time. I think we had 7 people, maybe 9 people at the planning commission. It's been 2.5 years. To be honest with you, it's almost 3 years in January. So again, our shot clock is 150 days. I think we've met our burden. We've met our legal obligation. And we ask that you move forward to support the Planning Commission's decision.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Colleagues, any follow-up questions? Why don't we now hear from members of the public that are in support of the project sponsor, if any? Okay, and unless there are any other members of the public that are going to speak on this issue, let's now hear from a rebuttal by the appellant. Up to 3 minutes.
Supervisors, I'd like to thank you for listening to us. We had no other really recourse but to come to you, and it didn't have to come to this. We could have potentially resolved this much earlier had the process been improved. I think there's a problem in many respects with trust. Why do we, the community, not trust AT&T? How come, why can't they get our trust? Not just us, not just our community. Each of your communities, as they apply, not just AT&T, but the other carriers, you're going to go through the same thing. He said, she said type situation, where it doesn't have to be like this. The WTS siting guidelines, I think the spirit was excellent back in 1996, but somehow that whole intent the focus has been lost. And there's no accountability to us, the citizens. You are our leaders, and we look to you to help us. District 1, with Supervisor Marr, is our leader, and each of you have your own district and constituents, and this is going to be a problem. We need to find solutions. Residential areas are not where antennas should be. They should be as indicated in the guidelines on public areas, places where people are not living, And it's interesting that the firefighters, the International Firefighters Association, had a resolution that prohibits antenna on their buildings. I wonder why. I think there's a problem. So we need to solve this, and I really thank you for the opportunity to bring this up, because it is a burr in the saddle and will continue to be. I am for technology, but it has to be right. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, any final questions to any of the parties involved today?
Yes, may I continue my pictures? Because I didn't finish.
Unfortunately, ma'am, every member of the public gets up to 2 minutes to make public comment. If you'd like to submit the pictures to us, we can take a look at that.
Okay.
We could give it to our clerk.
Okay, but if I do explain to you, you will see picture clearly. What I say is acceptable
thank you
for
very
this
much.
hearing.
We hear what you're saying. Unfortunately, we need to give every member of the public the same amount of time. So thank you very much. Colleagues, any final comments before we close this hearing? Supervisor Marr.
Thank you, President Chu. I wanted to thank the many residents from the neighborhood and
Supervisor Marr, can we close the hearing, or do you want to make comments
please
before we
close
close
the
it? Okay.
hearing, President
Colleagues,
Chu.
unless there's any objection, this hearing has been held and is now closed. These items are in the hands of the board. Supervisor Marr.
So I wanted to thank the residents from the Richmond coming to speak, and Ms. Freehouse as well from AT&T and the planning staff. I urge my colleagues to listen to the sentiments of my neighbors in my district, and I'll be moving that we disapprove the conditional use authorization decision. I think the lack of notice and the lack of the community being able to even just dialogue with AT&T on this is a critical part of it. I think the independent study done by the neighborhood should be looked at carefully as well. I appreciate the planning staff's walking us through the issues, but in my opinion, based on my knowledge of how close sensitive receptors like young from birth to 5 children are so close to the 9 antennas, plus the many different restaurants and other activities, especially Sushi Bistro, which is one of my daughter's favorite restaurants. It's my neighborhood that we're talking about, and my neighbors are very fearful of approval of a project like this. So I ask you to stand with me and my neighbors in rejecting this conditional use authorization decision. So I'll move that we disapprove the conditional use authorization. So that's item 23, and that we table items 22 and 24.
Supervisor Marr's made a motion to disapprove the CU. Is there a second to that? Seconded by Supervisor Kim. Colleagues, any additional comments? Okay.
Mr. President?
Yes. Let's hear from our city attorney.
Mr. President, if it is the desire to disagree with planning and approve the appeal, you would also want to approve item 24.
Okay. So again, just to make it clear, Supervisor Marr is making a motion that we approve items 22 and 23, and we table item 22. Let me ask our city attorney anything else that we need to know before we vote on this item.
Yes, Deputy City Attorney John Givner. A number of issues have been raised today. The issue that you mentioned, Supervisor Marr, is lack of notice, which is a planning requirement, not a codified requirement as a basis for rejecting a conditional use.
So, Mr. Givner, I'll just say that it's not necessary or desirable and not compatible with the community based on the evidence in the record and the testimony from the community.
Thank you, and my office will work with the clerk to prepare findings for the next meeting consistent with your comments.
Okay.
So then, Mr. President, we would not approve item 24.
The item 24 would direct the clerk's office to prepare the findings based on the testimony and evidence provided today. So the board would approve 23 and 24, and then the clerk's office would prepare findings to present at the next board meeting.
And we table item 22. Is that the? Okay.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay, so again, we'll make the motion as been proposed by Supervisor Marr, seconded by Supervisor Kim, and described by our Deputy City Attorney. And with that, let's call the roll.
Supervisor Farrell? Farrell, no. Supervisor Kim? Kim, aye. Supervisor Marr?
Aye.
Marr, aye. Supervisor Tang?
No.
Tang, no. Supervisor Wiener?
No.
Wiener, no. Supervisor Yee? Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos? Avalos, no. Supervisor Breed? Breed, no. Supervisor Campos?
Aye. Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Chu?
Aye.
Chu, aye. Supervisor Cohen?
No.
Cohen, no. There are 5 ayes and 6 noes.
This CU requiring 8 votes, the motion fails. So, okay. I've been advised by our clerk that a motion to approve the CU would be in order here. To our Deputy City Attorney, is there anything else you want to add to that?
Deputy City Attorney John Givner, no. So the motion would be to approve item 22, tabling 23 and 24.
Okay. Is there someone who wants to make that motion? Supervisor Farrell is making that motion. Is there a second to that motion? Seconded by Supervisor Breed. And with that, let's take a roll call vote.
Supervisor Farrell? Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim? Kim, no. Supervisor Marr?
No.
Marr, no. Supervisor Tang?
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener?
Aye.
Wiener, aye. Supervisor Yee? Yee, no. Supervisor Avalos? Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed? Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos?
No.
Campos, no. Supervisor Chu?
No.
Chu, no. Supervisor Cohen?
Aye.
Cohen, aye. There are 6 ayes and 5 noes.
The issuance of the conditional use is approved. And with that, colleagues, Madam Clerk, could you read the in memoriams, if
Yes,
any?
Mr. President. Today's meeting will be adjourned in memory of the following individual on behalf of Supervisor Yee for the late Mr. Sandy Siegel.
And with that, Madam Clerk, is there any more business in front of the Board of Supervisors?
That concludes our business for today.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are adjourned.